Trauma, drama, and friends you can't count on. I'm not going to ask if we haven't all been there, but maybe we have been. Maybe we have been. And so this morning we're going to kick off a 4 to 5 week series in the book of Job. We're not going to do a deep dive. I'm not going to break down every speech, and we're not going to, you know, we're not going to do the intense study. Now, I have been in an intense study of the book of Job, and it was in the fall of 1987, my second senior year in college, and I enrolled in a class called Hebrew Wisdom Literature with a scholar in residence, a retired Hebrew and Old Testament professor from Southern Seminary in Louisville, Kentucky. And he had taught there for nearly 50 years. And he was a brilliant man. He graduated from Oklahoma Baptist University, where I was attending, when he was 17. He had began to teach classes in German, Greek, and Hebrew at the age of 15, and he completed his doctorate at the age of 24. He paid for that while playing for a professional basketball team in Cincinnati in the league that was there before the NBA, right? And his schedule was he went to class on Monday, got on a single engine airplane and flew from Louisville to Cincinnati and played a basketball game that night. And then he didn't have classes on Tuesday. And so he played the next night and wherever they could drive to from Cincinnati, which I think it was like Fort Wayne, Indiana. And then he flew back for class on Wednesday, and then flew back out and played a game on and did that. And he was working on a doctorate, right, doing that kind of thing. One of the most interesting characters you could have. He had, he was so renowned in his understanding of Hebrew that he taught in Hebrew University in Jerusalem, and just incredible. And let me just tell you that my 22-year-old brain would go into his class going, man, this is going to be really cool. And I would come out each time going, oh my gosh, what do I do with that? It was just, just powerful. And it's one of those things that, and I've been searching all week trying to find what trunk is that notebook in. Because I know there's a notebook with the notes I've saved all these years. I was desperately trying. So far, no luck. Hopefully, you'll get it, but maybe not because then I'll want to really dig in. But anyway, so Job, you know, is an ancient book, and so today we're going to be looking at understanding the curse and the cursed, and so uh, no one is exempt from drama or trauma. I think none of us ever realized how much we made our parents worry until we became parents. Is that, kind of the thing? You know, and also, uh, we also struggle to really understand. We never really understand loss until it hits home, until it comes close to home, right? We really don't understand that until it comes close to us. And sometimes our troubles are pretty easy to explain and are self evident. This has been kind of my norm. I was an idiot and I got myself into this predicament. And we can understand that and we can deal with that. Really, I mean, we know how to cope with that, you know. But what about those times when we are doing our best? We're trying to walk in faith. We're honoring God. We're worshiping God in Christ, but things are broken and life isn't working. That's all right. We are facing adversity, and there seems to be no rhyme nor reason to the adversity. The most charmed life is shaken by adversity and distress from time to time. So how do we deal with the difficult days, the times that make no sense? and everything's going down the garbage tube. Well, Job tackles this, and this is one of the oldest stories in the Old Testament. Job predates the law of Moses and probably took place sometime during the period of the patriarchs detailed in Genesis 12 through 50. So when I say that, that would be during the time of Abraham, but he could have predated Abraham. We just don't know. He lived in the land of Uz, and as we heard him described, he was the greatest man of the people of the East. So Uz probably would have been, and we saw that he was attacked by Chaldeans. So he probably would have been in what we would say the Middle East or the eastern region of the Middle East, more over towards Iraq, even into Afghanistan and that far east over there. And so he was the grandson of, he lived in the land of Uz. Uz was the grandson of Shem, making him the great grandson of Noah. So the land of Uz, so sometime after Uz established his territory, Job entered the scene. So that gives us a time from maybe a couple of 300 years after the flood, or 3 or 400 years after the flood, up until the time of Abraham, or during the time of Abraham, that we would see this time. And so Job is mentioned also in the prophecy of Ezekiel during the Babylonian exile in the 500s BC as an example of righteousness. The book of Job is considered Hebrew wisdom literature, and it is written not as a historical. It's basically a book of wisdom, and so the way it is set up, it has a prologue. Chapters 1 and 2 set the scene. Here's the scene for the discussion. It has 3 series of speeches. As you dig into the speeches, they each represent different types of worldly wisdom. And so you could have ancient wisdom, you could have Eastern wisdom in there, you could have a very legalistic with. But as we look at that, each of the different friends who does the speech represents a different kind of wisdom that was out there. By the way, all of their speeches were worthless and of no help to Job in his time of trauma and grief. And so we look at that. Also, at the end of that, after we get 3 rounds of speeches from 3 different types of wisdom, we get another dude that shows up, and he gives the angry young man section. You know, the angry young people that come up and go, "You guys don't know anything." And then 30 years they're going, "Oh, I get it now." And we're not going to make you raise your hand if you've been there, done that, right? And so we see this. But then the most important speech is the Yahweh speech, and then we have an epilogue to wrap up the story. And so it delivers these things, but the whole premise, really what it deals with is how do we respond to suffering? How do we respond to traumatic events? And how do we respond to be friends, church family, and ministers to those who are in the midst of trauma? I had to do a lot of training at work. I had to catch up on all of that. The stuff that I've had a year to do, now it's done in 3 weeks. And so one of the things was about some of the characteristics, the trauma that people in prison suffered before they came to prison. And the amount of abuse and neglect and victimization that happens at an early age is an earmark for the vast majority of those. And so, we live in a world where people deal with trauma. For an adult, Well, we're just breaking up. For a child, it's abandonment, right? And so we go through all these things that we deal with, and so we want to look in how do we deal with trauma, and how can we help those who are going through trauma, and how can we have a godly perspective on that. And so let's dig in. We're going to look at today, though. We're going to set the stage for it, and we're going to set the stage for it in this: is we want to understand the curse and the cursed one behind human suffering and separation from God in Job chapter 1 and in Job chapter 2, verse 3 through 10. Now, how many times have you heard someone ask a question, why does God allow human suffering? And here's the question that you need to ask them. Why does Satan crave human suffering? Why does he crave it? We're going to try and answer that this morning. I told you I'm going to give you an exciting ending to a sermon on the book of Job, from the book of Job. You're going to like where this goes. So we're going to pick it up in chapter 1, verse 6. So we've seen that we set the stage of who Job is in verses 1 through 5. It says, one day the sons of God came to present themselves before the Lord, and Satan, the accuser, also came with him. And the Lord asked Satan, where have you come from? He says, from roaming through the earth and walking around on it. Then the Lord said to Satan, have you considered my servant Job? No one else on earth is like him, a man of perfect integrity who fears God and turns away from evil. And Satan answered the Lord, does Job fear God for nothing? Haven't you placed a hedge around him, his household, and everything he owns? You've blessed the work of his hands, and his possessions have increased in the land. But stretch out your hand and strike everything he owns, and he will surely curse you to your face. Very well, the Lord told Satan, everything he owns is in your power. However, do not lay a hand on Job. So Satan left the Lord's presence. Now, then I'm going to skip reading verses 13 through 18, but we know then that he lost his livestock, he lost his camels, he lost his wealth, and most important, he lost his children. And it even goes out to, in the beginning, it says that Job would go out and offer sacrifices on behalf of his children and ask God to have mercy on them if they had sinned. And so he had been, but now all of that was taken from him. And I want you to notice that Job did not respond with perfect aplomb. He was visibly upset. He acted kind of, radically. He did look what he says. He goes, then Job stood up, tore his robe, and shaved his head. These are all, he tore his garment. He fell to the ground. He shaved his head. I want you to know that a grief response is a healthy response. When I do grief counseling, and I will talk to someone who's trying to be tough, I talk to them about the fact that grief is the price we pay for having the ability to love. And if you did not have the ability to love, this loss would not bother you. And so if you weep or you're depressed, all I'm seeing is a man who loves his mama. And so as we love people, as we care about people, when their time on earth is done, grief is the price we pay for loving. And let's face it, I'd much rather pay the price of grief than live a life without love and true love. And so we have to understand, we as believers, although we believe in the great reunion in heaven and we look forward to that, trauma is real. And grief is something that we are going to go through in this life. Now, he did respond in a godly way. There's a godly way to respond to that, and there's an ungodly way. Here's the godly way. He says, naked I came from my mother's womb, and naked I'll leave this life. The Lord gives, and the Lord takes away. Blessed be the name of the Lord. He remained faithful and subservient to God. It says, through all of this, Job did not sin, nor blame God for anything. Now we drop down to Job chapter 2, verse 3 through 5. Then the Lord said to Satan, have you considered my servant Job? No one else on earth is like him, a man of perfect integrity, who fears God and turns away from evil. He still retains his integrity, even though you incited me against him to destroy him for no good reason. Skin for skin, Satan answered the Lord. A man will give up everything he owns in exchange for his life. But stretch out your hand and strike his flesh and bones. And look what he says a second time. And he will surely curse you to your face. Very well, the Lord told Satan, he's in your power, only spare his life. So Satan left the Lord's presence and infected Job with terrible boils from the soles of his feet to the top of his head. Then Job took a piece of broken pottery to scrape himself while he sat among the ashes. And then to make it worse, his wife said to him, are you still holding on to your integrity? Curse God and die. Curse God and die. Now, I will say this. The Hebrew word that is translated curse here is most often translated as bless. And so here it is interpreted as bless out. Now that's a phrase that we don't use anymore. If someone was to bless you out, it was kind of how we got the word cuss. Or if you were to bless out, it was a derogatory, it was a negative thing. So on that, it really doesn't matter the point of it. The woman was moved, or the wife was moved at the sight of her husband's suffering to tell him to give up. Let go of your integrity. Let go of your faith in God and just be done with it. Ask him to take you out. Be done with it, right? And so we look at that. But I want you to notice something that's important. Twice Satan said to God, he will curse you to your face. And the greatest temptation that he received, not from Satan, but from those around him, was to curse God. What a powerful thing. But why? Why was Satan so interested in seeing this man curse God to his face? Well, the answer is misery loves company. Go to the next slide for me. The one living under a curse wants to make God's righteous man curse God. Now think about this. Why did he show up to tempt Adam and Eve? Because they had a relationship with God that he no longer had. They were in perfect peace with God. He had challenged God, had been thrown out of heaven. We see the same thing in the temptation of Jesus. What was his purpose? He wanted Jesus to fall under the same curse that he was under. all he wants for you is to suffer the same fate that he will suffer. So, what's the motivation of Satan for the separation of men and women from God? Well, let's read about that in Revelation chapter 7, chapter 12, verse 7 through 12. 7 through 10. All right? Why was Satan so interested in the righteous man cursing God? Because he's living under a curse. You know, when we come into this world, we're living under a curse. We're separated from God by a sin nature. But because of Jesus, we have the opportunity to be born again, to be redeemed, and that curse is put away, and now we're no longer living under a curse, but we are blessed as the children of God here and hereafter. So here's why Satan really wants people to curse God and die. Then war broke out in heaven, and Michael and his angels fought against the dragon. The dragon and his angels also fought, but he could not prevail, and there was no place for them in heaven any longer. So the great dragon was thrown out, the ancient serpent who is called the devil and Satan, the one who deceives the whole world. He was thrown to earth, and his angels with him. Then I heard a loud voice in heaven saying, "The salvation and the power and the kingdom of our God and the authority of his Christ have now come, because the accuser of our brothers and sisters, who accuses them before our God day and night, has been thrown down." Satan doesn't want you to go to heaven because he got kicked out of heaven. Now, I want you to look at that. Go back and look at that passage. It says that he is the accuser who accuses day and night. The Hebrew interpreting, the name is Hasatan, the accuser. And so the book of Job is important because it gives us insight into what the forces of evil have in mind. It is Satan's desire for us to be divided and angry and bitter and miserable and never satisfied and never at peace and to die and go to hell. Because that's who and what he is, and that's what he has to look forward to. See, we look at Job and we see all of these things that have happened, but you know what? I've lost a lot of people. I still believe. I have failed miserably. God restored me. You had high points, low points, points. But God has never left you. And the key for us is we can never leave him. The accuser of our brothers and our sisters, he accuses us and he wants to bring us down. But wait, there's more. Now we're going to go to chapter 20. In Revelation chapter 20, look what we see. He says, "Then I saw an angel coming down from heaven, holding the keys to the abyss and a great chain in his hand. He seized the dragon, the ancient serpent, who is the devil and Satan, and bound him for 1,000 years. But after that, he must be released for a short time." Then we drop down to verse 7 through 9. I'm going to read verse 7 through 10 here. "When the 1,000 years are completed, Satan will be released from his prison, and he will go out to deceive the nations and the four corners of the earth, and Gog and Magog, to gather them for battle. Their number is like the sand of the sea, and it will look hopeless. They came up across the breadth of the earth and surrounded the encampment of the saints, the beloved city. Then fire came down from heaven and consumed them. And the devil who deceived them was thrown into the lake of fire and sulfur where the beast and the false prophet were, and they will be tormented day and night forever and ever. You see, the cursed one wants you to live under a curse. The cursed one wanted Job to curse God. The cursed one did not want to see someone living in harmony with God and honoring God and prospering from that. He did not want to see him go through that, but receive that. He wanted to inflict pain on Job so he could inflict pain on the heart of God. The one who is cursed, his destiny is defeat. It's revealed. He wants you to share in his defeat. And he wants you to die so he can inflict pain on the heart of God. Now contrast that with Jesus, who gave his life on a cross so that you could be at peace with God, that you could experience the love of God, and you could have the inheritance of heaven rather than a lake of torment. So that's Satan's motivation. But let's go forward. So what do we learn from Job in this? What was revealed in Job and his decimation? He lost everything. He lost family. He lost wealth. He lost health. Man, this guy went through the ringer. But I want you to notice, here's what was revealed. His children and his family were not his God. Now, our children can make decisions that we don't like. And we have to be honest about what God's Word says in regards to a lifestyle, in regard to a life choice. Listen, we have to be honest. Jesus said, listen, if you turn your back on me for your mother, father, sister, brother, children, you're not worthy. You have to take up the cross and follow me. And so we have to confront those things and say, listen, I love you, but you're not my God. His camels, donkeys, and livestock were not his God. If we lose everything tomorrow, I don't want to have to illustrate this point personally. God's still on the throne. His house, his land, his servants were not his God. His health was not his God. Job was sustained by faith through the hardest of hard times and the deepest of losses. And if you go to the end of the book and read the epilogue, spoiler alert, Job found restoration and a second life at the end of the book. And that's what Jesus has in mind for you. Restoration and a second life at the end of the book. You want to see it in writing? You want to see what Jesus has in mind for you? Go to Revelation chapter 21, verse 5 and 7. Then one seated on the throne said, look, I'm making everything new. He also said, write, because these words are faithful and true. Then he said to me, it is done. I'm the Alpha and the Omega, the beginning and the end. I will freely give to the thirsty from the spring of the water of life. And the one who conquers will inherit these things, and I will be his God, and he will be my son. Understand that Satan is under a curse of separation from God and eternal damnation. His desire is for you to curse God and die. There's a reason that he said he will curse you to your face twice. And there's a reason that Job's wife was motivated or influenced to say, just be done with it. Curse God and die. But Jesus has something much better. He's the beginning and the end. Whatever's going on in this world is just whatever's going on in this world. Before anything else existed, in the beginning was the Word. Jesus existed. At the end of all time, Jesus will reign. And He invites you and I to participate in His glory. So as a believer, we can have hope in the face of trauma. And so as we look at the book of Job, we're going to try to look at hard times and hard words and difficulties, but we're going to look at it with the hope of glory, because we know that at the end of the book, Jesus has restoration and a second life for you and I. Trauma, drama, and friends you can't count on. We've all encountered that. We've all dealt with that. We're going to know what that's like. We know what that's like. Hey, listen. Let's not focus on trauma, drama, and friends you can't count on. Let's focus on a Savior we can count on. We don't join Satan in his curse. Live in the blessed state of glory with your Lord and Savior, Jesus